Hello and welcome to Security in Context. I'm Anita Fuentes, and today I have the pleasure to speak to Edward Ongweso Jr., who is Security in Context's newest member. Edward is the finance editor at Logix Magazine and the co host of This Machine Kills, a podcast on the political economy of technological innovation. His work has also appeared in The Nation, Slate, Dissent, Motherboard, Vice, and more. And very soon he'll be publishing stuff on our website, so stay tuned. Hello, Edward. We are very happy to welcome you to the project, which you'll be joining as a senior researcher. And my first question for you is if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, your past work, why you're interested in this kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, and I'm excited to be joining Security in Context. Um, I think a lot of my work I focus on uh, technology sector, Silicon Valley. Very interested in the ways in which these technologies have been financed, designed, developed, and deployed. A lot of that history comes out of Silicon Valley, but beyond sort of the entrepreneur mythology. There's longstanding history that stretches back to the Cold War, it stretches back to military-industrial complex, it stretches even further back to the kind of robber barons that have shaped and developed the frontiers of trade, of capital, of pseudo racial science, of eugenics, of extraction and devastation of land, and the technological developments necessary to squeeze as much from fossil fuel resources out in California or from the mines in California. So there are long-standing relationships and historical inputs connected to California and connected to the tech industry um, that I've been really interested in over the past few years since I started writing. But what drew me into it initially was labor conditions on ride hail platforms, um, and the financiers who were not just interested in exploiting a legal loophole so that they could push their firms to monopolies and turn a profit, but who venture capitalists are part of an older struggle by capitalists and conservatives and reactionaries to unwind the threadbare reforms that have capitalism capitalism has been subjected to over the past few decades. And so I think that's where the interest in political economy and and finance and the tech sector itself and its relationship to the rest of society comes from, and leads to working with this research initiative.
Right. And I wanted to ask you about this, right? About what you've been working on as an organizer, as a researcher, in terms of how Silicon Valley's model is restructuring labor and social relations. So I'm particularly interested in how does Silicon Valley and venture capital intersect with surveillance capitalism and with militarism?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I mean, a lot of the products that come out of our technological sector oriented around surveillance in one way or another. I think a lot about this essay that was in the monthly review called Surveillance Capitalism. That is, I think, a much better framework to think about than Zubov's. And that the argument there is, since the golden age of capitalism, there have always been these productive crises, and each of them require technological developments to better anticipate, discipline, guide, control behaviors of populations, either as consumers, as financial actors, or market actors, or as subject populations. Um, and you'll have a better time understanding the types of technologies that are developed if you understand the needs and the desires of the military industrial complex, the advertising sector, of businesses operating with one another, with financial firms, and understand the sorts of technologies they need, whether it's For the post-war period, where there was a need to figure out what to do with uh, the surplus productive capacity that we had at the end of World War II, and trying to galvanize consumers through the advertising revolution and through the commercial sales effort into certain types of products, into certain types of brands, and certain types of lifestyles and certain types of routines, and that putting enormous pressure on surveillance on top of Cold War geopolitical competition, driving an interest in pattern matching, surveillance heavy, and force projection capable technologies and armaments. With financialization and the ascent of financialization, the need for technologies that are also about surveillance, about securitization, about constantly figuring out ways to eke out fees and the process of a transaction, or to figure out how to package together experiences or not or previously non-commodified goods and services or slices of daily life into new markets and new frontiers for investment and speculation. And then also, in the modern era, kind of figuring out how to develop technologies that can anticipate where force needs to be projected as various systems start to disintegrate and untangle. And venture capital has been a very important part of this puzzle in trying to understand what sort of technologies get developed and pushed, because venture capital in of itself is a tightly connected network, a niche of investors who style themselves as seers, but are better understood as lemmings, who are trying to make investments that enrich themselves and each other. Because investors, venture capital investors, what they ultimately do are taking other people's money and playing with it, but they're also in a position where they control the valuation of the underlying firms, um, and they can push them as high as they want, and they use that and they leverage that to to generate speculative wealth, transfer it to themselves, make it real, leverage that into political power, lobby for political reforms, and economic and legal reforms that they want, uh, to ensure that they can preserve their wealth, preserve their power, preserve their privilege, and push technological developments and political developments in a direction that align with their values, which are usually conservative and reactionary. Um, and so as a result, you can think about the historical influences and the needs of larger sectors of society, the military industrial complex, of advertising in general, the financial sector, of border and police authorities. Um, and you can also think about the financial interests of the people who are the main financiers and funders of a lot of technology, because the way that it's developed is, our models, small firms or startups coming together, getting funding because they don't have the track record to get funding or loans from a bank, getting funding that also values them at a certain rate, that also demands they figure out a way to justify, rationalize that, which usually narrows them in on certain business models that can hyperscale or growth oriented, that can monopolize, or that can just be acquired by another large firm or competitor or entrant, or incumbent, um, and as such structure most of these goods and services and ideas and technological innovations in ways that it's about bolstering an existing monopoly, pursuing a new monopoly, or trying to take advantage of some froth or some hype cycle to enrich everyone involved, as opposed to anything that's genuinely innovative. And when it is, it's when there are innovations, not to say innovation never happens. There are innovations that happen across the sectors, but a lot of it being focused in on what is the most profitable, incidentally, what may have some good or benefit for the rest of us.
And so I want to talk about your research on Uber and Lyft drivers.
Mhm.
What insights did that work give you on the gig economy?
Yeah, I mean, I started doing the research on them because before I started writing, I think the only reporters who had really honed in on the nature of these firms, which is that they are taxi companies that rely on labor loopholes to misclassify workers as independent contractors so they don't have to pay them the full labor cost so that they can move around this money elsewhere. Um, and subsidize rides, grow a user base, strangle other transportation options, raise the gates and hike the prices, further cut the wages, somehow eventually get a profit. The only people that have been really kind of talking about this were the labor reporters, because the labor reporters were actually focused on what it's like to be on the platform. For about a decade, most of the writing about Uber and Lyft was apologia, talking about how amazing it is that you can just call a taxi on your phone. Most of the work had been like taxis are corrupt and need to be replaced, and cities that don't embrace Uber and Lyft are cities that are in bed with big taxi cartels. And so, most of the work I was trying to do in the early days was trying to talk about labor conditions that Uber and Lyft drivers were suffering, and promote labor perspective on this, and then also talk about how it could be that something that was so exploitative was so widely celebrated by a lot of politicians and public figures and writers and researchers and economists and academics. And part of that is, Uber and Lyft have taken up a lot of pages from other corporations' playbooks, but also invented their own. Right? They've taken playbooks from big from tobacco and big pharma, for example, and a playbook that's common throughout the private sector, which is buying economists to build your own academic research program, so that you can produce academic research, ostensibly objective research, and insist that this is proof that our talking points reflect reality. And they would do this a lot to talk about how maybe it looks like the wages are going down, but in reality, they're actually robust and high, because these lower wages allow for help inflate demand, or actually keep it at an optimal level for everybody. That when they hike prices, they're not actually hurting the ability of people to travel in transit areas where they've strangled all the competition, and that they're actually not outcompeting or not suppressing the revenue that transit authorities are going to get overall. That they're a value add for cities at large. They don't increase congestion. They don't increase pollution. They help people get to their jobs and work on time. They help cut down on drunk driving. Um, Uber and Lyft. The writing also tried to hone in on how uh, they represented kind of the frontier of a certain type of tech company that said it was a tech company but wasn't, and used an app or used a digital tool or implement to insist that it was not only was it a tech company, but it was subject and needed to be subject to different rules and regulations. And Uber and Lyft were instrumental in creating this transportation network company legal category, which has become the bedwork, the bedrock of um, a lot of the regulatory frameworks, and the ways in which people think about how to regulate these firms, how to operate with them, how to integrate them into our transit systems. And it also leads back to the funders, right? Because Uber's major funder, SoftBank, also has and occupied a very central role in promoting certain kinds of tech firms, and this investor, this venture capital investor, is a platonic ideal of the rest of the industry, which is backing investments that will lift up other investments in their portfolio, but also backing investments that will at times serve as a Trojan horse to make it easier for um, other entrants to replicate the same, and maybe they can back um, back a new player, and not just to inflate the value, but to make it easier for the firm to actually operate, to get integrated into public life, to get subsidies from cities and states, to get welcomed by the public, and baked into people's routines and imaginations, so that by the time you do the deep work and you realize they're not profitable, they do contribute to pollution, they have horrible working conditions, they do contribute to congestion. All the academic research that these economists were doing was bullshit. It's too late, right? And I think that was kind of the large takeaway from Uber and Lyft. They were buying time to integrate themselves permanently so that they could win, and they, to a large degree, kind of have in the United States and Europe.
Yeah, I agree, which is very unfortunate. But I think we can move on to another topic that's hopefully more exciting. Uh, and Lyft, which is what you're working on now, and specifically what topics you'll be working on and you'll be exploring with security and context.
Yeah, security and context. I'm going to be focusing on artificial intelligence, uh, and of course, more broadly, we're going to be talking about Silicon Valley, financial um, backing of various firms, public-private partnerships, the venture capital industry's role in trying to promote certain types of artificial intelligence. But I'm really going to be honing in on artificial intelligence, on the AI bubble, and the excitement behind generative AI, behind the types of artificial intelligences that are being pushed for by police forces, border authorities, prisons, hospitals, all sorts of walks of life that have accepted this idea that humans, this idea that stems from, you know, this earlier, like I was talking, this longer phase of surveillance capitalism, um, via Zuboff as opposed to, via the monthly review as opposed to Zuboff, which is about figuring out, how do we ensure capitalism keeps going along? How do we ensure profits keep going along, as opposed to how do we invent some new productive system, right? That surveillance has been a core part of capitalism, and then artificial intelligence just offers a new frontier for it to be developed and tinkered, and maximized, right? And so, trying to investigate specifically what types of technologies are being advanced in pursuit of this surveillance, what types of financial flows can we use and track to map out and get a sense of who's backing certain types of artificial intelligence that are being developed and why and where they're being deployed, and also thinking through alternatives, whether that be regulations, bans, dispossession, public alternatives and options that might, all sorts of interventions that might be able to help stem the tide against, um, these sort of pernicious forms of AI that are developing, as well as larger, scale, more international approaches that might be able to help us, because these sorts of AIs, since they're being integrated and are an outgrowth of the military industrial complex, are also going to find expression in the coming, uh, slowly heating up Cold War between the United States and China, in the frontiers are in battlefields as drones and supposedly autonomous systems are deployed on battlefields, and as more esoteric and exotic digital and algorithmic systems are used in cyber warfare against other nations and other actors, right? So figuring out or trying to think through, what are the flashpoints, what are the intent, what are the large attractors here in the field, what are the dangers and concerns here, and who's pushing us towards the brink in any of these given crises.
I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add before we wrap up. I'm very excited, to have you join the project and to read all the stuff that you're going to be writing. Um,
The thing I'm the most excited or hopeful to write about is alternatives and things to do, right?
Utopias.
Writing about, maybe we should be stealing, some of this computational infrastructure and data assets from these firms, and figuring out, if it makes sense to build public alternatives, what they should do, what their mandate should be, who should be in control of investing, um, and what would a public investing look like? What kind of hard bans should be in place on certain types of artificial intelligence? Because otherwise it's very depressing stuff. It's not. We're not in a good. We're not in the. We're in a very bad,
Bad
scenario.
place.
Yeah, bad place, a horrible place.
In the bad place, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I also look forward to reading about the alternatives and the positive stuff, which there's a lot, and I think we should not be too pessimistic, even if we're in a bad place right now, because otherwise, how are we going to make the world better, right?
Right. Right.
Thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm sure that your participation will bring great things to the project. So, as I said before, I'm looking forward to hearing more from you and reading more about technology and AI and everything that you've been working on for the last few years.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was great talking with you.